Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Fake Accents Unite. I am joined, as always, by the based Britisher. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Just needed to, clear my throat. I'm eting at the same time while sitting here, so it was just panic stations for a second there.
Oh,
But good evening.
We're also joined by a guest which we've had on a couple of times before, Poe the Person, a good friend of the stream. Good evening.
Hi, I'll try not to keep eating suspense. I'm far too nervous for having me on.
And our star guest, I suppose, of this evening is Arch Warhammer, who joins us from a relatively unpolitical sphere. It's a pleasure to have you here with us.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm sure it'll be fun.
Well, I certainly hope so. Yes. Would you like to explain what the primary purpose of your channel is for those who may not be in the know?
Well, primary purpose. High-minded. See, I just talk about, toy soldiers on the internet. I don't even know if that really, even if it qualifies as a primary purpose.
You provide entertainment to the masses and appear to be deeply storied on one particular fictional universe that takes your fancy, which is the Warhammer universe.
So is it the toy soldiers, or is it sort of everything that sort of involves that particular universe? Because I believe there are also computer games, aren't there?
Yes, I'm primarily focused on the lore stories behind their things. The entire universe of Warhammer 40k.
I mean, does correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm completely clueless in this department, and many out there will be thinking, yes, he's completely clueless about much else too. But isn't it the Warhammer thing that people are using in a lot of those memes with Trump? You know, when he's the God Emperor thing.
Yes.
That does indeed stem from Warhammer 40k.
Oh well, there you go. See, so at least I now know for certain. So
I was terribly disappointed that we couldn't get that great, wasn't it, Italian automatron, for lack of a better.
Yes, I remember. I looked it up once. Apparently, it's somewhere close to Florence and somewhere along the coast, and it has sort of once a year. I think it has several performances of it, but once a year it has this huge sort of extravaganza where there's a massive march past.
Yes.
With floats and whatever. And yes, they do seem to kind of be going, ever more ridiculous. Every year they do it. And yes, the last time they did it, this year more than likely has fell flat on its face because of the COVID-19 thing. Especially in Italy, as you can imagine. But yes, last time round they went full on God Emperor Trump. I mean, it must have been, 30 feet tall, that walking monstrosity?
Fully articulated claws and all sorts, yes. I remember, because I was talking to Sargon about it, and we were trying to get it into the UK, and it just wasn't happening. He seemed relatively happy at first, but they just wouldn't let it in. Into the country. Eventually fell through. But,
also, that you actually did manage to get in touch with the guy who had made it and whatever, did you?
I believe we did, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I remember sort of seeing him, when I was looking this to up. Yes, there was a chap who was actually responsible for the whole thing. So either you or Sargon are obviously fluent in Italian, I assume.
No, I don't think it's that. I think it's more likely that
he spoke English.
The continentals are more well versed. Although with Italians you can never tell. Yes, but giant statues of God Emperor Trump, which are a little bit of an aside. This week has been. I was getting up this morning. I was going, what are we going to talk about on Fake Accents this evening? There doesn't appear to be much going on in the world. And yet I've been provided with a plethora of different events just over the course of both the last week and today, in fact. Because, of course, the biggest story of today is probably the case of Ken and Karen. Have you heard of Ken and Karen, ladies and gentlemen?
I have seen the Sargon video of Ken and Karen, and
Or has he done one already? He's beaten us to
yes,
it. We're
yes,
doing dead content already.
That's how I know. That's how I know about this. So apparently, it has become quite the meme.
Yes.
So there are posters and whatever of them sort of in Rambo pose, as though it were a film.
Yes.
So apparently, once again, it's some kind of Black Lives Matter protest that I believe was heading for the house of the mayor of St. Louis.
Yes.
But on the way there, because it's some kind of gated community, they also passed a rather large mansion that is very sumptuous and luxurious. So
Yes.
it appears
Although,
they kind of went towards that.
It is interesting to note that the number of people who are basically shitting on this couple and their house, either because it's an affront to good taste because it's too opulent and rubbing people's noses in, or because, oh, you think this is a good house? This isn't a baller's house. This is in St. Louis or wherever it is. Clearly, there's nothing great about this house. It must have sold to them for less than $1 million. Huh? He's not as much of a high roller as you are, and then posting things like
it's not Blenheim Palace. Yes.
No, or well, they're not. They're posting up pictures of modern build things that, or like LeBron James's penthouse suite in New York or something like that, and just making a comparison and just being like, "This is what a baller looks like." Oh, shocking.
But yes, anyway, the crowd seemed to be going up this guy's drive towards his house. And this chap came out of the house, yes, sort of complete with rifle, and told them to get off his private property.
And keep moving, yes.
And his wife was alongside him, kind of in Charlie's Angels pose, with hand pistol.
Making very, 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 very poor firearm management. She would definitely be up in front of the boss if we had anything to say about it.
But it was interesting insofar as, here they were faced with a mob, and clearly they had a house into which they had put a lot of effort. Now,
yes,
whether you like the house or not is irrelevant. It had more than likely taken them half a lifetime to get it into the condition it is now.
Yeah, 35 years.
They had simply decided that they were not going to allow for a bunch of looters to come up their driveway. More than likely, the police, once again, to remain completely invisible. And therefore, they decided, well, we've got firearms. Here we go. And it was, yes, it was an interesting kind of standoff. And I think the crowd kind of realized that these people are actually going to shoot us if we try. I think that was the persuasive factor, that this wasn't just grandstanding. I have a gun. Don't you dare come near my house.
No. Well,
but I think it was the general sentiment of, if we actually do try to get into this guy's house, he will shoot us.
I understand it as well. This was a largely impromptu detour because they are required to submit their protest route, and this was not their official protest route. Whether or not the actual the use of the private road as a thoroughfare is enforceable in the state, I'm unsure. It seemed to be a bit of contention from the Americans as to whether or not it was legal for them to even be on the road. But it certainly has to be said that they've just gone. They've seen private road, big houses, and and decided to make a nuisance of themselves for what I would gather to be no profit.
I don't know whether you saw that clip by Tim Pool. He made one unproven. Of basically some folks kind of melding into the whole demonstration at the front. and then steering it down a place where they were not supposed to go.
Mm.
And of course, tens of thousands of people then follow. And therefore, when you have got permitted routes where the police have made it clear you can march there, but they also make clear that if you go down this street or if you go down that street, we will use force to deter you. So you then deliberately steer them into harm's way, because like that, they will then come under attack from the police. There will suddenly be tear gas and there will be things like that. And you will then have footage provided by the demonstrators themselves, assuring everybody they're being completely peaceable. And yet they're nonetheless being attacked by police.
It's the optics that matters, because if you see a video of peaceful protesters being attacked by the police, or nobody's going to care that they were on the wrong route or they were on private land. They only care that they weren't attacking.
So this is in a way a means by which some of these activists can, in a way, use the very footage, not their own footage, use the footage that is innocently being provided by people who believe completely truthfully that they came under attack, even though they were being completely peaceful, without having realized that they were actually being led down a route that they were not supposed to go. So when you hear something like this, you're once again wondering, did this demonstration really, by its own, under its own steam, decide to go there? Or were they once again led, and everybody follows the Pied Piper? And then suddenly they ended up somewhere where they were not supposed to be, and they had an angry house owner in front of them going, clear off my land.
I think I agree with the person in chat who says that this private road should have... Or I think I read it as armoured bears, but that would be quite good. Or perhaps a Necron Defence Force, Arch? What do you feel about that?
Sentry guns. The only sensible option.
So are these kind of sort of remote control guns?
No. You take a criminal, you lobotomize him, and you turn him into a half-sentient human weapon.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay. Yeah, so this is kind of someone with sort of a scooped-out brain, really. This is sort of a zombie gun bearer.
Yes.
And in this way, you avoid all the nastiness of any potential issues with artificial intelligence, because zombies are much easier to put down than Skynet.
I mean, can we at least agree, therefore, and not to have the guns, but flamethrowers instead? I think it would make for more of a spectacle.
Unfortunately, on some occasions, the offender in question that has been turned into a servitor will remain fully aware of his surroundings and awake at all times, suffering through centuries of agony and horror. And boredom.
I mean, that's,
Yes, we can put a flamethrower on them.
Okay, good. Because, I mean, we finally have found a use for those people who toppled Edward Colston's statue.
Speaking of Colston's statue, have any of you caught Voltaire's Ghosts video on Edward Colston?
No, I have not. No.
Definitely.
Although I do believe he's good box office. Yes.
Definitely worth a look if you have the time, because it turns out he didn't even own slaves.
I mean, he was a slave trader. Yes, he was.
No.
He lived in Bristol.
He wasn't a slave trader. He worked. He was on the board of directors for a company that happened to trade in slaves, but also happened to trade in hundreds of other goods as well.
Well, it's what I pointed out in when I mentioned it once in the week that was, in that particular week when it happened, that there is such a thing as triangular trade on the Atlantic. At the time, that's how it worked. So you took goods and gold to West Africa, you picked up slaves from West Africa and shipped them to America, and then you brought back cotton or sugar from the Americas to Europe. So like that, you were never traveling empty.
It's the triangle of life.
So that's what they were talking about, with the triangular trade of the North Atlantic. between Britain and Africa and the Americas.
Yes, but what I'm trying to say is his personal. It sounds like the way that they've talked about him that he went over there and got the slaves himself.
No.
So I think, whereas his own personal views on slavery are very much unknown.
Yes, he was an MP. He was also in finance, so sort of large-scale money lending.
Yeah.
So this is not a guy who was captaining a ship and wielding a whip somewhere below deck. This is a financier who gave a very large percentage of his wealth to the city, which he needn't have done. And it's that act that is commemorated in the statue, and not what else he did.
Have you had anything? Because Arch, it's Norway you're from, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct.
So, so have you got anything similar going on over there with regards to these sorts of protests, or is it just something for us, the colonizers, as they call us?
We did have some Black Lives Matter protests. We did, which is interesting because in Norway, the police are not even allowed to carry guns or even pepper spray most of the time. So why they are protesting police violence here is beyond my ability to understand.
It seems very strange. I imagine your numbers are considerably lower, even given the population difference, to the UK, where they're complaining about the fact that 13 total, both unarmed and armed, minorities, shall we call them, were killed in police custody over the past decade, and of which 3 were unarmed, and all of them can be attributed to reasons which are not racism. So it's been a very strange one for us. I did see a good video.
I do. Before you go on to something else, there is something else I need to pull you up on here, because you're referring to us as the filthy colonizers.
Yes.
Whilst you are speaking to a Norwegian, a Viking.
Look, they did.
We did not colonize. We call difference.
Conquered other white people, so it wasn't racist.
They pillaged rather than colonized.
Well, they pillaged. I mean, they did a lot of pillaging and then, going back home. But at some point, they also did pillage and then decided to stay, which I think a lot of Northern Britain can attest for. So, yes, in that case, it's precisely the Danes and the Norwegians and whatever that we should be having our, British Lives Matter protests against. Because these were the people who came and abused us, and who now, obviously, Norway is quite well off with oil money, by the way. They now obviously owe us reparations, substantial reparations.
Britisher, I never thought I'd see the day that you shilled out for reparations. But I'm going to catch us up with a couple of super chats, just so we don't get too far behind. So Coney currently here says Tory Incorporated are always 5 years behind the dissident right. They won't fight the cultural Marxists unless they're threatened electorally in 2024. Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen?
I've got thoughts.
It's a dangerous thing thinking. Are they relevant to the conversation, Poe?
No.
I do worry about the Tories. They've been remarkably, shall we call it, spineless over the course of the last. They've been silent observers, really. And
it was an interesting tweet that I got from Phil Mason, the famous Yorkshireman, on Twitter, who sent me sort of an article in which somebody was actually arguing in a column that is precisely what the Tories ought to be doing. It's the reason he sent it me was because he was sort of saying somebody must have been listening to you on the week that was. But yes, I was kind of saying, look, it will arise at some point. The political powers will take this on. Whether it emerges yet is another matter. In this particular article, it was being said that behind the scenes there were actually people advising Boris Johnson to start a war on woke,
Right.
to basically enter the culture war, and basically to plant your flag firmly on the side of, sort of traditionalism against this, incredible thing we're faced with at the moment.
I mean, it'd be a good start.
As such, what I kind of laid out in the week that was, I think it's inevitable. It will happen. When exactly it will happen, that's another issue. And I sort of thought, look, Donald Trump and Boris Johnson may indeed decide that eventually this is for them. But, as such, I feel it more than likely won't be them. Because of the way they define themselves. So Donald Trump is the America First president. So strictly speaking, he's kind of the economics first, the economy first, get people jobs. That's the sort of thing in which he sees himself strident. That's his mission as a president. Here in Britain, Boris Johnson would see himself as the Brexit prime minister. I mean, always consider that this thing hasn't even finished yet, when it comes to Brexit. We're still in the middle of this. So as such, the way they define themselves to the public, and we know that, these days all the more one likes these kind of simplistic messages, is, economy for Trump and Brexit for Boris. Whereas what we need is somebody who actually comes in and becomes the culture war president or the culture war prime minister, and who basically says, it's the wokeness, it's that thing that I will take on and I wish to be measured by that.
Yeah.
And
the Orban, shall we say, of Britain.
In a way, yes. We need a Thatcher. But a Thatcher who is not concerned with fighting the unions anymore, but who is effectively concerned with fighting this malaise, if you know what I mean. And I think it will inevitably arise, because I think the mother lode of the electorate is actually completely against this. And once somebody gets sufficiently advised by a psephologist, as in, you can win a landslide with this, and I'm not talking an 80 majority, I'm talking a 150 majority here, somebody will go with this. And it will be a Tory. It won't, it clearly won't be happening on the Labour side.
So you're
it
saying
will be a Tory, and some Thatcher person is going to come in and do this.
So you're saying Prime Minister Tommy Robinson 2024. I understand.
Well, it's the simple fact that we don't know how much pain the populace can take. When Thatcher came in, when Thatcher came in, we were having 3-day working weeks and British Leyland strikes, and we didn't, we had outages in electricity and whatever. It took that to finally get the British people and to get the party system to even put up a candidate like Thatcher, and for the people to go for it. So it takes a lot of pain before eventually it happens. But they're already toppling statues. So I've got the feeling you're actually getting pretty close to the nerve by now, I think.
I hope so.
And as I said in the video, it won't be, it won't be helicoptering. It won't be, civil war and race war and whatever some people are dreaming of. No, it will simply be a kind of Thatcher moment where somebody comes in and just goes, enough. Enough is enough. This isn't going any further. And I will stand up to you. And if need be, like in the Battle of Orgreave, where thousands of policemen met thousands of union workers, if need be, there will be a big clash. And there will be cracked skulls. I don't care. We are going to resolve this, and this is going to end. And it will be the government that wins this. Because in the end, if it's the choice between the government or people in black hoodies, it's the government that represents the people.
I really hope so, Richard, because I'd really hate to have to repurpose my hammers. That's right. Makuta Pterodac says, 134 seconds late, I beat the Dane to the post. Thank you very much, Makuta Pterodac. It's always good to be reminded of when we are late.
Yes, I wonder what Sir Scowen... Maybe Sir Scowen is in shock of you having a Norwegian on.
I don't know, he's been remarkably absent. Just so you know, Arch, we usually have a chap called Scowen, who's our resident Norwegian. He is currently in the voice chat below ours, but he usually chimes in and tells us how late we are and how we should obviously bend over and allow him to axe us and allow the Norwegians to conquer Britain again.
Is Scowen actually Norwegian?
Yes.
I thought he was Danish, but okay. He's.
No, I'm saying Norwegian because it pisses him off. He's from Denmark.
There you go.
He's from Denmark, yes.
Are there any opinions that Norwegians have on Danes? Preferably unfavourable ones.
Denmark is a vacation colony.
Yes, I can see that. Denmark, I believe, is also a world power at the Winter Olympics.
No.
Yes, that's a very concise answer towards that. I believe they've only ever won one medal, haven't they? Which is unusual for a Scandinavian country.
Well, they're not Scandinavian.
Ooh, okay.
The shade.
We grant them usage of the term so they won't feel too left out, but they're more German than anything else.
So what you're saying is you permit them to kind of use that sort of Scandinavian flag motif that all the countries seem to use up there, but that's really just sort of it's generosity on your part.
Fun fact, we stole that from Lithuania, I believe.
Good to know.
That doesn't really come as that much of a surprise because it seems to me that various sort of seafaring Scandinavian countries stole quite a bit over the centuries.
People want to ask.
I don't remember if it was it Lithuania or Estonia. One of the Baltic countries wants to be Scandinavian, but we keep them out because they're Russians as far as we're concerned.
So,
but
why?
They have
why
a
do they want to be
folktale.
Scandinavian? Is this because they want in on the Eurovision Song Contest lobby group?
They want in because it would give them access to our free movement, the Schengen trade zone, which is quite beneficial. And we also have a long and amusing history. The tale goes, there was at this point they were starting to become Christian because the Templar Knights had killed lots of them. And they prayed to God, give us victory. And God supposedly gave them a flag with the cross on it, except it was then subsequently stolen by pirates. And shortly thereafter, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, all having crosses in their flags as well. And that is supposedly the creation myth.
That's, yes, I quite like that. We didn't have a flag of our own, so we nicked one.
Seems logical. I've just been told, and I'm skipping several super chats here, but I will get back to the others eventually, that there's a new development about the Ken and Karen gun-toting homeowners who have released a statement. So this is Mark and Patricia McCloskey, and they've released a statement through their attorney saying they fully support Black Lives Matter. They wish to set this record straight about the protest on one hand and the actions of a few individuals who sought to exploit the otherwise peaceful protest.
Yes.
They said they've got careers protecting civil rights of clients victimized by law enforcement. The protesters were not the subject of scorn or disdain. To the contrary, they were expecting and supportive of the message of the protesters. The action of violence, destruction of property, and acts of threatening aggression gave rise to trepidation and fear of imminent and grave harm. Their actions were born solely of fear and apprehension, the genesis of which was not race-related. In fact, the agitators responsible were white.
Yeah. Shall I give you the short version of this?
Yes.
Please don't come and burn down our house when we're not there. We're completely in support of you.
Yes. It's the right message, and it's
racist
about time.
in any way.
We're not
Ultra.
racist.
Damn whitey.
We were only pointing guns at the whiteys. That's what
Now that we're being more realistic about these legendary figures, is it before moving on? Is it worth talking about whether perhaps they were a bit overzealous in protecting their property by preempting? I mean, I really have no. I don't know how much interest the protesters were taking in their house. They weren't supposed to be there, obviously. They were like on that bit of land, and yet it does feel like it was perhaps a little bit. To play devil's advocate, let's just say,
Yes.
maybe they were exacerbating things a bit.
They responded suspiciously quickly. I will say that. Like, do you really have an M16 just standing by, the doorway just in case?
I would really love it if they just stayed inside the house, and as soon as someone had stepped onto their lawn, they just shot them.
On that note, though, there was a genuine danger of that because the Ken, excellent gun handling. He never pointed his gun at the protesters.
Only his
triggered
wife.
discipline. The Karen, on the other hand,
Triggered, like wiggling her hand around gangster style.
Well,
And yes.
To answer Poe's question, I honestly don't think they overreacted. I don't think. I mean, I understand what you mean, as in kind of, you're cranking up the handle. You're only further, increasing the tension. But I think it was more a matter of an absolute deterrent, as in, we know what you're thinking. We've seen plenty of pictures of, places being burnt down. And this is not going to happen here. I really think it was just making it absolutely clear we don't care whether we're abandoned by the police. If any of you try this, we will shoot you.
Now, I wonder if maybe they should have asked first, then got out the guns. I really don't know what happened. Maybe they did ask nicely first.
I mean, you've seen what happened in other cities, though. That's the other thing. It's like, you can't trust these people. There's very little trust between anyone who owns anything of any value and BLM protesters, because they've shown themselves to be not just inconsistent, but very aggressive. So I feel like...
I think the violence we have seen on some clips has been off the scale. I think, so therefore, I think you don't try and sort of persuade your way out of it. You basically just say, okay, this is what force I have at my disposal, and I will use it. And I think that's what they did. And we don't know how big a crowd they were actually faced with, because the camera is pointing towards them. So we don't know how big a mob was actually behind that, behind that perspective. What were they faced with? So if they were really just faced by 20, 30 people, that would be one thing. But what if there were 500 people facing them?
I don't know about the scale of the protest. It looked to me like a couple hundred people. Definitely. So I want to get back to these super chats so I don't get lost. Mr. Will Guitar says, last one with kidney stones just isn't committed to this live stream and YouTube content provision. Just kidding. Get well soon, Britisher.
Thank you very much, Mr. Will Guitar. Yes,
explain this to
more
people.
can I say, you complete bastard. Yes.
The Britisher has been suffering this week, ladies and gentlemen, but thankfully he's with us today.
Yes. I had a impromptu visit to hospital, which yes, it was something for the gods. Trust me.
JS says, YouTube purge, Jake Paul, Molyneux, Spencer, all gone. Yes, we'll be getting on to that a little bit later. Thank you for that, JS. This chap here, Arakeen, says, is Poe a friend of the streaming people? Poe?
I'm a friend to all streaming people.
I don't know what this reference is. Is like whether
friend to the working man, I think, one is taking that slogan and one is
and bending it deeply out of proportion. Radical Liberation says St. Louis has more private streets and neighborhoods than any other city in the USA. This is one of them. There's no right for those protesters to be on that street. Thank you for clearing that up, Radlib. Good to know. Mr. Gently Benevolent says, as we're on servitors, I can just hear Archer's ears pricking up. Is Lammy mankind's first example of someone who could be turned into a servitor without the hassle of removing an actual brain? So, David Lammy, are you familiar with David Lammy, Arch?
I have heard British whinging noises from Sargon on multiple occasions bearing that name, so yes, vaguely.
So David Lammy's fame has reached Norway. That's what we're saying here.
Yes, clearly. I mean, even the agents of Lammy have infiltrated every government across Europe.
It has infiltrated the distant fjords of Norway.
The meme is that David Lammy actually controls the UK, and he basically he's just a complete race grifter who gets by on the colour of his skin and nothing else, and constantly moaning about how he's oppressed when he went to Eton. Just something somewhat ludicrous.
Well, he's the world's most oppressed Etonian.
Yes. Anaquin Cringewalker says, I still say we should introduce Marxist professors to the Apache sky dance. It does bring a most peculiar rain. Yes, definitely. I like the meme at the moment, which is the helicopter and someone being thrown out of it, and it says, go be a communist somewhere else. It does make me laugh. Mr. Will Guitar says, Norwegians failed to deal with the thing, and it was left to Kurt Russell. Most shocking behaviour. I think we can all agree with that. Great film, by the way. Good choice. One of my absolute favourites.
You have a favourite film?
Well, it's my favourite horror film, is The Thing.
Yeah, no, I just find it funny that sort of, you have a favourite out of half a dozen films.
Look, I watch films, Britisher. I just don't watch your films. It's as simple as that.
You see, you must understand, Arch, that Not So Obvious has got a very limited repertoire of films that he has ever seen.
I haven't seen Ben-Hur either, Mark, by the way.
Oh, good to know. Good to know I'm not alone.
Dear God, I am surrounded by complete imbeciles.
I'm completely serious. After lockdown's over, Mark can come round to my house and we'll watch Ben-Hur together.
Well, there you go.
We'll force it and then do a live review afterwards on the sofa.
You can refer to it as educational.
Are you much of a cinephile, Arch?
No.
It's just like the British are waxing lyrical about how I'm surrounded by these ingredients.
Flickering pictures is mildly amusing, that's about it.
Given that you are into Warhammer or whatever, I would assume that you have a liking for science fiction.
Oh no, because all science fiction is inferior to Warhammer.
Ah. So we have a purist who thus never watches anything. I can see why you've invited this guest, Not So Obvious.
I like Arch's content, and I thought he would have interesting things to say. That's what it is.
I have transcended the need for silly Western movies and instead discovered anime.
Oh no! Oh god! I'm sorry. I didn't bring a weeb onto this show. Nonsense. And here I thought you'd just be someone who favours. How shall I put this? The power of imagination to bring hard science fiction, Asimov, Warhammer, etc. to life. And now I find out that you'd much rather sit there and watch JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Ridiculous.
Asimov has many positive qualities, but to the best of my knowledge, he has yet to introduce any form of big-titted anime catgirls into his novels, and so he's just not good enough.
Just like, It's just so in contrast to your particular style of narration, Arch. It's just I can see why you get on.
Yeah, I can see what would. I think we're getting a flavour of what would actually tempt Arch into the cinema.
Yes, if it's got a tail, like it's borderline bestiality. That's all I say.
I'm just thinking, what was that? What was that James Corden flick? You know, he'd had one or two hits on British television, didn't he? What was it? Lesbian Vampire Killers or something like that.
Yes.
It was actually quite a funny kind of exploitation flick. It was already a miracle that they managed to do it when they did. Today they'd more than likely be, crucified publicly for such a thing. But I think that's, given what Arch describes, that's more than likely the area in which one would drift, were there to be sort of that sort of fare on offer in the cinema.
What's the name of the film in Legion, the episode of Red Dwarf, where he's trying to use a particular technique from Attack of the Killer Bikini Vampire Girls,
something like that. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Some nonsense.
Yes, we're in that territory. Yes.
Oh dear. DRT is king says. Just double checking that I haven't missed one here. No, good. Says Byzantines, the greatest and most sustainable period of Roman history, making up a time roughly equal but to both the Empire in Rome and the Republic combined. Shake off this German propaganda. The people of the age called them Romans. British, is this addressing you directly?
Yes, these are the Byzantines that required Belisarius to actually go and find Rome for them again. So I'm sorry, I will once again refer to the fact that the Roman Empire actually is the period in which Rome was in charge of things. So yes, I know this is proving hard to understand, but it is actually quite simple.
Thank you very much, DRT's King. That's very generous of you as well. Mr. Gently Benevolent says, will you be providing your new stones to your loyal follower Harry-Ann for his collection, Mr. Britisher?
Harry-Ann has a, or Taffy as we all know him, let's face it, has a stone collection, does he?
He's a real geology nerd, yes.
So he's the person you don't want to lock up at Shawshank.
No, and I'm struggling to. I mean, I know he mines his way through the wall and bashes his way into the pipe with rock, but
yes.
Okay, never. But yes. Mr. Will Guitar says, is Ben-Hur the guy who played Gandhi? You can just hear the British are having an aneurysm.
So
marvellous. Architect of Fate says, Arch, this is America. Of course everyone has a loaded M16 in every room of the house. Also, given the caste doctrine in that state, since they were advancing toward them on a private road, they could have legally shot them all until they turned around. I suppose it's a is it a shame or is it a blessing that they didn't do that? It's hard to tell, to be perfectly honest.
It's for the best.
I would never advocate the shooting of idiotic protesters on a whim, to be perfectly honest. Even I wouldn't go that far. Although I know that if the academic agent were here, he'd be going, whoa, wait a second. Let's just hear them out for a second here, Hear out the shooters rather than anything else. English Loyalist says, I will be honest, these protesters are lucky people to have restrained themselves. Try this on the reservation, there would be no quarter, no survivors. I really, I don't know too much about the area, and I don't know how accurate that would be, but...
It's a bit like the Indian and the Chinese army meeting each other in the Himalayas.
Yes! In fact, that's a good tangent to jump onto this, actually. India has just banned TikTok, WeChat, and dozens more Chinese apps, saying they are a danger to the country. And not just for national security, I can imagine, because TikTok itself is a cancer of the mind. But
let's face it, they're just denying them their market, aren't they?
Yes.
Because effectively, things are rather
they
fraught at the moment.
They know full well they have 1 billion people, and they can leverage the banning of those apps. So
you're aware that the TikTok, I don't know about these other ones, but TikTok is used to protest the government in China.
Is it?
Yeah,
How?
well, it's very difficult for the AI to pick up very subtle things, forms of protest. But people basically, I found this out from watching This American Life, mind you. So maybe it's a dubious source, but people are copying one defiant-looking dance move, posting basically cryptic dog whistles. They can get a lot of. It builds a kind of sense of solidarity that you really need for a revolution. So I'm not saying that they. I think it's a big shame that it has been banned, but I can actually see why they've banned it.
It's kind of sad, isn't it, that they're so subverted that they have to. They're so oppressed that they have to subvert in such a kind of slightly bizarre and unique way. I think you found your calling now, though, Arch. You need to get the cat girls to be the symbol of resistance on TikTok. Are you going to lead the charge?
See, I am quite interested in the whole China thing, because China's moving more and more into gaming, which is, of course, my area of expertise.
Yeah.
But I am happy to inform you that the Chinese government has already thought of this, and they have not only installed face scanning systems, they also have GPS trackers installed on your phone. When you use TikTok, dissidents will be found and will be corrected.
Oh, for goodness sake. Yeah, I know that TikTok's collecting an awful lot of personal user data, although it's a little bit more restricted in the West.
I would point out that surely the cat ladies would be on the side of the establishment, not on the side of the dissidents.
Nekos are, by their very existence, rebellious free spirits.
Well, no, I just mean because Mao means cat.
Dishonest, the name.
Nice. I like that. Just Mao the cat.
Move on.
It was bad enough. Now that we've lost Winnie the Pooh in the region, we need another way to make it work. I've completely lost my train of thought with that one. Thanks, Barisha. But yes, India have banned 59 apps from China, including their popular messaging app WeChat, which is effectively the equivalent of Instagram over in China.
WhatsApp.
I would love to see more of that. I would love to see this escalating and escalating until we're in a full Cold War with China, because I really think that's what we ought to be doing.
You just like the idea of the Cold War coming back, Britisher. That was quite a good time for you.
Oh, well, yes, of course. No, it's just quite simple. That's how we defeated the Soviet Union. And it's fairly obvious that China is setting itself up as a rival, seeking to be the global hegemon.
I mean,
I think the rest of the world shudders at the thought of China being the biggest power on the planet. And therefore, I think they must be prevented from doing so. And the way you would do that, given that war with them is not really practical, would be the same way in which you conducted yourself against the Soviet Union.
I think it's naive to think that China ever stopped acting as if it were in a Cold War situation with everyone else. They've extended their tendrils into all sorts of places, including property markets. They are deliberately buying up an awful lot of property, particularly in the UK. And of course,
in all fairness, I think a lot of the property being bought is actually by people who are trying to secure their capital away from the Chinese government.
No, it is not the Hong Kong. It's not the Hong Kong lot. It's the Chinese who are also attempting to buy up property to prevent the Hong Kong lot from being able to secure their stuff abroad. It's basically a tactic where the Chinese officials are given money and bust in, and they sell the house that day because they're never going to live in it, and it's just so that they can acquire assets in the country. And they do this all over Europe, as far as I'm aware. But I remember a friend of mine was trying to buy a house in the north, and he said that basically certain towns, once they've been earmarked, were completely off limits. You couldn't take any time whatsoever because they would just bus in these Chinese officials who would then they would bid on the property and then sell it on. So yes, there's that. TikTok, I believe, is currently being questioned because it saves your clipboard data. It steals all your clipboard data, so all the screenshots that you've had, any images that you've downloaded, it wants those, it knows what they are, and sends that data back to its servers, which I find quite dodgy in the first place. I'm glad I've never downloaded it.
This is unverified, so keep that in mind, but
okay.
One person claims to have reverse engineered, and it checks your phone hardware, CPU type, numbers, hardware, screen dimensions, DPI, etc. It checks all other apps installed. It scans everything network related, IP, local IP, routers, everything like that, Wi-Fi. It also checks whether or not you have any, what's the word? God damn it, my English. Virtual network, to bypass firewalls and stuff like that.
VPN.
VPN, thank you, yes. That, it also has a GPS pinger on a 30-second timer. They also, on some occasions, have set up a proxy server router in which they can download and run anything they want, basically.
Interesting. Obviously unverified, but that doesn't sound outside the realms of reason, even if some of those might be a little bit, dicey in terms of, the idea that it can download whatever it wants seems a little strange because usually people get warnings about, especially if it's on data versus Wi-Fi.
I think one has to kind of differentiate between whether this would be happening abroad, even if there is the theoretical potential to do that, or whether they can do that in China. And I think would anybody be surprised if they did that within China?
No.
I mean, given that that's where it actually emerged, if you know what I mean.
Not even a little bit.
So, whether the capacity would obviously be built in wherever the system then spreads to. That doesn't necessarily mean they would do it on a grand scale abroad, even though no doubt they would like, even just knowing that they have the potential to do that. But within China itself, would really anybody be surprised if they're up to that? I don't think. I think it would almost be taken for granted.
I just
the
and
Huawei
downloading programs too is not that difficult. All it would have to do is basically it sets up a proxy server on your phone. So it tells the phone, okay, here's a Wi-Fi tower or whatever. And you can use that to download data packages, which you will receive no notification of. And I would not put it beyond the Chinese tech-savvy little bastards that they also figured out a way to basically unzip this data and so put whatever they wanted on your phone without your knowledge. Think about how handy that would be. You have a dissident, you want them to go away. Oh, what's this? Illegal material on your smartphone? Oh, unfortunate.
Yeah, that's really concerning about planting information. Sorry, Poe, come on.
I was just saying, I'm not particularly illiterate in technology, but if someone does understand it a bit deeper, it would be good to hear about. Like you said, Mark, when I download an app, I have to approve all of the permissions for that app. It's asked me, can this app access your files? Can it access your camera, your microphone? To manually approve all of those. I don't know if that's a restriction that's put in the hardware level or at the software level, or at what level is that?
That's generally the operating system. Just double checking that you wanted to do things, but you know what people are like, and a lot of these apps are very invasive anyway. So they'll say things like, oh, can we just access your contacts because we need access to the network in order to transfer the files? We're not actually going to do anything with your phone numbers, but we need to have access to that part of your phone. Definitely, can we access media files is obviously the most common one. But I can see easily, just a lot of people who don't really understand what they're giving away, just spamming allow because it's the next hot app.
Well, if you want to share a video of yourself, if you want to share a video on TikTok, then you've got that video saved into your files, and then you have to give permission.
Yes.
To your files in order just to use the app.
Yep.
Well, but isn't the the social credit system they set up in China?
Yes, although
doesn't that also kind of discount sort of credit you? Go ahead.
With regards to the social credit system, I will say, because I've spoken to a number of people from China who I would consider trustworthy, from my sense, and some students as well. And when they talk about the social credit system, they say it varies wildly from region to region. And by region, of course, you're talking about country-sized spaces.
Yeah.
And so she said, one of my friends, she said, I'm only aware of 2 particular regions in China where the social credit system is enforced in the way in which the West lambasts it, but everyone else it doesn't seem. So either they're trialing it in these different areas, or it's something to do with the regional authority and the ways.
I can well imagine that one is kind of trying various degrees of severity, as in kind of testing out how far one can go, and then eventually introducing that for everybody in the same way that, there was a time in which there was no social credit system, and then one trialed it in a few areas, and then one introduced it everywhere. Indeed. And now there are more than likely more severe areas, and again, one is seeing how far one can push it, and if that works out to be practical as far as the authorities are concerned, that one introduces everywhere, and so on. So it's like a pilot scheme. But one of the things one hears about that are being discouraged by the social credit system are, spending lots of time playing computer games, and also spending a lot of time on social media, because these are seen as sort of things to be discouraged. Well, wouldn't having access to all your computer records in that regard via the very phone you're using be a very good means of monitoring that?
They already do have access to some extent. There is literal laws in China stating that minors may not play video games for more than 1 hour per day, and this requires facial recognition software.
Yeah.
That's heartening, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh,
very.
Yes. Who knows?
I mean, on the bright side, we complain about the West today. We go like, oh God, could it get any worse?
Yes. Yes. Very, very, very much so. Yes. And speaking of China, so we've got all this stuff going on. We've obviously got Black Lives Matter going on here. One thing which this is an article I found which has been basically pushed into the back of BBC News today. China is forcing birth control on their Uighurs to suppress their population, the report says. So China is forcing women to be sterilized or fitted with contraceptive devices in Xinjiang in an apparent attempt to limit the population of the Muslim Uighurs, according to a new research report by Chinese scholar Adrian Zenz.
I think it's an opportunity here to complain about the stereotypical names that Chinese give themselves. Well, Xinjiang.
Xinjiang. I assume
their biggest municipality is Chongqing.
I just assume that I'm butchering the pronunciation. I'm always laughed at by a couple of my Chinese friends. And that sort of thing. It's like when we try and say Baizao, or whatever it is that they call the woke leftists over here. This entitled Westerner who doesn't know anything, because that's pronounced completely differently. And also their own country's name, because they don't call it China, they call it something else. And so anyway, doesn't matter. But we butcher that one. So, China naturally denies the allegations, calling them baseless. They're already facing widespread criticism for holding the Uyghurs in detention re-education camps.
But amusingly enough, not widespread criticism from the Middle East, who instead actually loudly endorse their efforts against extremism.
Really? Is it because of the particular brand of Islam that these Muslims follow? Do you know?
Yep. Iran, for example, have come out in support of this action against an unruly part of the populace.
It's almost like Muslims don't really like other Muslims all that much.
Well, if you look at the current stability of the Middle East...
yeah.
But plus, at the same time, of course, Iran is an ally of China.
Yes.
You know,
how
with
much
all the
can
oil
they say?
embargo and whatever, we all know that, any oil that the Iranians are selling is going to China at the moment.
So you reckon their lips are sealed through for politics, basically?
I think politics also will play a part, yes.
They are apparently...
But then, I mean, oppressive regimes will never condemn... will rarely condemn other oppressive regimes because they know that eventually the boomerang returns back, if you know what I mean.
Let's see. 35 countries have, in fact, offered support for China's action against the Uyghurs.
Really? Good grief. And they're on the Human Rights Commission, are they, for the UN? And that side.
Some of them, yes. Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Qatar, amongst others.
Good grief. I mean, they're calling it genocide. It's hard to argue, although it's preventing them from having more than 2 children, as far as I'm aware. But when they talk about like barbarism towards these oppressed minorities in the progressive stack over here, when there are literally 1 million Muslims being forced sterilized and forced to eat pork in these re-education camps to become more Chinese, I despair at the level of ignorance in the West as to what real oppression is.
Well, I think, I think on sort of a big picture thing, there is also an element where some of the more sort of totalitarian nations and we know that totalitarian nations like to take sort of broad stroke approaches, if you know what I mean. That, we'll just do it like this, We know that they have got a sort of a tendency to do that. So you have kind of got minorities in some places that may be a bit of a thorn in their side or whatever, or may even be a cause of some fear.
Yes.
And now you look at it, and you kind of look at the sort of broad spectrum of what has been happening around the world for the last 20 to 30 years. And let's face it, one of the reasons why there isn't just absolute mass hysteria in the West about what is happening with the Uighur people is because it's Muslims. If the Chinese were doing this in Tibet, there would be a much stronger response.
What makes you say that?
Because I think that even though they're not, they're not operating as a monolith, I think that the Muslims as such have kind of, they've lost all the favor in the world due to what has been going on over the last 2 to 3 decades. And therefore they're kind of running out of friends. And these totalitarian regimes, because we're seeing something similar in Burma and whatever, they realize this. They take the temperature of the water, if you know what I mean, and then they realize now is a good time for us to do this because, frankly, these particular minorities have run out of sympathies, and I think that to a certain extent plays a certain part in plays a part in their calculations. That's not to say these people just deserve it. It's just, I think that is the reality of how they actually approach these things.
I mean, you could say that, Britisher, but I mean, the Chinese have done this to Christians for decades.
Well, the Falun Gong, yeah, I mean, Christians-ish, yes.
Yes, and they did do this in Tibet.
Well, yeah, I still think if they would start pretty much just interning Tibetans, you would get a much stronger response than with it happening where it is happening. And when it comes to the Falun Gong, again, there was a reaction, particularly in America, very Christian country.
Mm-hmm.
But it never got off the ground to this extent, because at the same time, it was not of that scale. But what we're seeing with the Uighur people is on a colossal scale.
Yes,
and
a million people.
I really do think they just feel they can do it because they know that it's very, very difficult to mobilize sympathy for a Muslim minority, and I think I think the Burmese are doing the same thing. They kind of realize that it's very difficult, and because it would be in the West, let's face it, it's not. You're not really that bothered about public opinion in Africa or whatever. It's in the Western developed countries, and it's particularly the Western developed countries that have been engaged in this war on terror for the last 20 years, and therefore patience is running thin, is wearing thin, and I really think that has a part to play in this.
Kathleen Batavian points out that they do intern Tibetans.
I mean, no doubt that they do, but not in this industrial scale.
So you're saying it's the scale of the thing. All right. Yes, I'm not sure what we do.
If you intern some dissidents in Tibet, even if you're deliberately making it so, because we know this has been happening for years now.
Yes.
You're importing, Chinese into Tibet in order to render them a minority within their own country, which I believe has already happened. One has clearly observed these things. We know these things have happened, but they have not just decided to stick a substantial part of the overall Tibetan population in what are effectively concentration camps. Whereas that seems to have happened with Uyghur people.
I want to take us off this rather depressing topic, but
yes, indeed, yeah, it is rather grim.
Yes. Any final comments from either of the other guests?
I was going to posit a bringing it back to alternative theory. To be honest, I don't really know much about international politics, and I think a lot of people don't. And part of the reason is that it's not politically useful for either what you could call the right or the left, or for the media. It's not useful for anybody to market it or to push it as it doesn't fit into any narrative. It's not a club that the left can use to beat the right or vice versa, and it doesn't make like an interesting. I hate to call it boring, but it's just kind of, just as Mark said, it's just a little bit depressing, and it doesn't make for good clicks and good videos almost. So it does just get forgotten, I think.
It's also very disconnected from people's experience. So you can talk about any particular group, you could name them whatever you want. If somebody said, oh, the Uyghurs, but how many people in the UK actually met or known a Uyghur? It's different to saying, oh, what the Gurkhas are being interned, right? Because they've got such a history with the military, and loads of people know the Gurkhas across Britain. They're much more inclined to be sympathetic and give their time to that. Whereas this particular thing, but when you have movements which claim to be international and things which have transcended borders, things like Black Lives Matter, who are, working on a platform of internationalism and global restructuring, then you have to bring in the international politics in order to go, now wait a second, basically what you're proposing looks like it'll lead to this, that, or the other. And it's a method of cultural comparison, especially when you're talking about cultural change, which a lot of these national and international organizations are looking at. I mean, everything that I get told as part of my psychology sort of education, if you want to call it that, is all about culture. It's all about changing the culture. So, in that sense, international comparisons are very valid. But I don't know how you, like, obviously in terms of media for clicks, that's not going to gel with the common person who is concerned about Joe blogs and their local community, etc. Yes. Yes? Are we am I speaking into a void here?
No, I can hear you. I was just advised at the time that you wanted to hear the other two, and basically I took that as a sign for me to shut up.
Fair enough.
I can't believe the British is that self-conscious.
Well, he's that kind to us. I'm just going to catch up with the last two super chats, which will hopefully guide us through. Makuta Pterodac says, what side would the Rakshi be on, USA or China's? Oh my goodness, that is a very niche reference that certainly the British will not understand, but I would say...
I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about.
The Rakshi would be on nobody's side. Makuta Pterodax, they are on the side of Matanui being asleep. But that's as close as I'll get to that. And the new IKB says, the question is, what will produce the least human suffering? A long Cold War with the Red Chinese, or a hot war started at a time of our choosing, starting with a massive alpha strike to cripple their nuclear missile response?
Yes, unless you find that you've missed one or two.
Well, yeah. Well, there's the question, isn't there? Because
and don't they also have nuclear submarines by now? I think they do.
Yes, they do.
So good luck finding them.
Britain's nuclear submarine program is a last resort in the sense that it is not a button which, as much as people have bitched about people like Jeremy Corbyn in the past pushing the nuclear button, it is not something which would ever be his decision to make, because the actual rulings that we have for Trident, and I'm pretty sure I'm not releasing classified information, is that basically, once the UK is screwed, it is at the captain's discretion of whichever Trident vessel is out at the time who they take revenge on and where. And they
I love that. I absolutely love that. And they come up, they realise it's World War III, and you've just got the captain sort of sitting in his cabin, quaffing a cigar, looking at the world map. Well, now, this is at my discretion.
But
where exactly did the ex-wife come from again?
I think it's more likely, mate, that his ex-wife is significantly nuked at that point, and his job is to nuke the French or whichever, the Chinese.
Where were the in-laws going on holiday?
I don't think it would. Goodness sake, British. like petty squabbles and there. Goodness sake.
Oh, come on, you have to admit, it does paint a picture that basically you've suddenly granted this captain, the power of God. He's sitting in a cabin just going, now, what do I want to do?
I think it's more likely that he has a target and the choice to nuke or not to nuke is his, as opposed to nuke whichever country
you out of it. See, now you're making this much too common sense.
If there is no more,
I'm quite sure the audience is with me on this one, not with you.
Although if there is no more Britain to defend, I suppose you could just go out with a last hurrah. If you could nuke anywhere in the world, let's start with Arch. Where would you nuke? Sweden. The poor Swedes, they embrace multiculturalism to such an extent that they have grenade attacks in the streets. and you're going to nuke them on top of that. Is it mercy killing?
No, I just don't like sweets.
Fair enough. Is there anywhere in the world that you would like to nuke, Poe?
Oh, I'd like to say something clever or funny, but that's the whole idea just really depresses me. Basically, you've ruined all of the farmland and the drinking water of wherever you choose. Even if you choose an unpopulated region, many millions will die. And I guess my answer is North Korea.
Fair enough. And Britisher, obviously, aside from yourself, who would you like to nuke the most?
Yes, let me think. This would depend on the time of year and the result.
Right.
So have the Australians won the Ashes?
It's like,
You see, I think, unlike other people, I think these things through. Have the Germans won the World Cup again? That sort of thing. So it's you have to have a proper reason to strike people. Just like Arch, he just doesn't like sweets. That's a proper reasoning, as opposed to whatever highfalutin concept you would employ to wipe someone out.
I have no need of highfalutin concepts. The entire object of this exercise is merely to prove that none of us should ever be at the helm of a nuclear submarine.
Fair enough.
The Duke of Bedford says, I understand that a certain Rahim Kassam liked a tweet by the Britisher concerning the flag of the East India Company. Could he enlighten?
He did indeed, yes.
Could he enlighten us any further?
I'm afraid I would be expected to know who Rahim Kassam is. But yes, he did like a response, because I think it was Rory Herbert who pointed out that Rahim Kassam had in his possession a copy of that particular flag of the East India Company, and I then basically just put in a little tweet saying, "Well, isn't that also the first flag of the United States?" ?
Right.
To which one then, obviously as expected, with a certain amount of mirth, responded, "Yes, it is indeed, but they don't like it mentioned." So yes, yeah, that's all I know. I'm afraid. Who Rahim Kassam is or whatever, I'm afraid I have no idea.
He's the former editor-in-chief of Breitbart London.
Oh well, there you go.
And he was the chief advisor to Nigel Farage under UKIP.
So there you. I am now confirmed as far right, lovey. Am I? Yes.
Yeah. Well, you're all right adjacent. We know, Britisher. You are the great radicalizer of our age.
Yeah, very much so. Yes. Until I upset them all again.
You need to stop getting into arguments with all these alt-righters. Speaking of alt-righters, now that Stefan Molyneux, Richard Spencer, and a couple of others have been completely wiped from YouTube, we saw kind of the start of this with last week, which obviously you weren't around for, Britisher, and the stream didn't happen until Saturday, but Iconoclast was taken down. I don't know if you're familiar with Iconoclast, any of you, but produced some very good kind of Black Pigeon Speaks-esque material where it's more thought piece than news commentary and that sort of thing. Sort of almost mini documentaries. A lot of it is his sort of wider philosophy, and I don't agree with all of it, but I certainly don't think he should have been axed from the platform. But Stefan Molyneux is obviously a much larger player, so what do we make of this particular development?
I'm not a fan of Molyneux by any stretch, but it's free speech and all that. Well, what are we here talking about? Just the same old thing, right?
Yeah, he Stefan Molyneux is not really my cup of tea, but again, you just seeing this continuing censorship, and I kind of tying this into what people can see on screen now, which is his account on Parler, which is this being touted as this new alternative to Twitter. It has about 1.5 million users at this point. I believe it gained 500,000 in the last week, so that's the big boost for them. Interestingly, they had their first big boost when a load of Saudi nationalists got basically banned from Twitter for being pro-Saudi Arabia, and then they got moved onto Parler, about 200,000 of them, which seems to be the initial base. But now they're, everyone from Donald Trump Jr. to Laura Loomer, Tommy Robinson, obviously Molyneux, Sargon's on here, etc., etc. And it's an interesting thing. Are any of you on Parler? I know you are Poe, but Arch or Britisher, any thoughts about this new platform?
I technically have an account there, but Parler at the moment looks like a very unfinished product. Like, there's not even a image function, so I'm holding off. I suspect this will probably be the next alternative that ended up not actually being an alternative after all anyways.
You think it's going to have the Gab treatment?
Essentially, yes.
See, if there's something which stands Parler apart from Gab, it seems to it functions very much in the same way as Twitter does. Yes, its app needs a little bit of updating. Its desktop version is a little further ahead, and it is still quite clunky, but all the same mechanisms that you would find on Twitter are there. And I think one of the reasons why people are engaging with Parler in a way which I haven't seen with something like Gab in the past is, first of all, it came with no baggage. Effectively, you had Katie Hopkins et al. Moved across to it, but didn't really have the... That's when the smear pieces started coming, but the people who are initially moving across are doing that. The CEO, a chap called Matza, I think he is, has put a 20,000... He's offered $20,000 to any liberal, a liberal from his list of people with over 50,000 followers, to come over and put an account on Parler and move across. A bounty which, interestingly, has not been claimed, but the actual engagement on Parler at the moment seems to be a lot bigger, better, and healthier than I've seen in a long time on Twitter. I'm certainly enjoying using the app. Like, I'm not sponsored or anything. I'm just enjoying using the app a lot more than the cancer that is Twitter. And it's true, it has a conservative/right-wing slant, but the articles which I've seen coming out about Parler, being a space for anti-Semitism and whatnot, is definitely not something I've encountered to any degree on the platform really at all. And it's strange to me to think that the atmosphere here has not been one of mainly... you'd expect a little bit of a bluster at the beginning of people going, "Oh, this is so much better than Twitter," or "Oh, that sort of thing," and then eventually you'd expect them to get bored of the fact that there's not a fight to be had on the platform, and either infighting or just the degradation of the platform. But I don't see that. I see a lot of people commenting on things, being fairly respectful to one another, even where they disagree. Because some people who I would say are more in the centre than the left have come across, but the ideologues from the left haven't come across yet. So there's certainly ideologues from the right, but there's not ideologues from the left. And the majority of people just seem to be getting on and having a decent conversation, although perhaps that's just the people that I follow and have having chats with. The only thing which concerns me about Parler is it requires a phone number in order to sign up, and it requires you to submit your either passport or driving license in order to get verified, at which point you can send direct messages. But unless you get verified, you can't send direct messages. That's quite a concern from what I can see. But I don't know.
You concerned at all about an echo chamber effect? I mean, I know that they're trying to get liberals on the platform, but I fear that the Twitter is too much of a nice hug box for the left, and then they're not really worried about freedom of speech, so they'll just stay there, and then maybe all of the right, call it that.
In some ways, it's also probable that because Twitter is obviously not an unbiased platform, and definitely it's not just that it's an echo chamber which favours the left because there's more left-wing people on there. It is a platform which actively targets deplatforms and attacks everyone from moderate right-wingers all the way through to the alt-right. Whereas Parler seems to be, even if it becomes an echo chamber in function, because the lefties just don't want to be on it, I don't know whether or not... I feel like that's better, especially if the app develops a bit better and becomes a smoother experience. I feel like that's a better thing to have, effectively people at the top who are at least attempting some semblance of neutrality, as opposed to Twitter, which just out and out lies and targets people and enforces hate speech standards arbitrarily, etc., etc. I don't see a even if it was exactly a carbon copy of Twitter word for word, but the right-wing equivalent, the fact that there isn't this kind of pressure from above to destroy debate and conversation, I feel like that gives it an advantage just morally, unless anyone wants to come at me on that.
No, I won't.
Fair enough. Yes, so the only thing is people are saying it's either it seems dodgy that to get verified you have to give over so much personal information, which they claim is so that whilst you can have an anonymous handle, they don't want you to. They don't want bots on the site, and this is effectively their form of bot protection that you have to use ID in order to get verified. But I don't know.
Yes, but do bots send a lot of direct messages?
I don't know. I don't know about. I don't know.
Platforms, yes.
But I don't know. Oh, go on.
I was just going to say, the time that I had a Tumblr account, a lot of the people I followed and most of the people who sent me direct messages ever were young women who were very eager to start DMing with me and wanted to. They wanted to get in touch with singles in their area.
Of course. So there's I'm not so there's argument about anti-Semitism going on Parler here. No, I don't want to go away. Whatever. Trump fans are flocking to Parler. Obviously, a lot of the team are on there. That sort of thing. But it is the exodus, interestingly, from Twitter to Parler, Twexit as they call it, has also caused an issue for other social media platforms, particularly Facebook. So, load of brands, Diego News, Starbucks, and a couple of others have basically stopped investing in Facebook for their advertising because they are doubling down on the woke narrative now. They're saying you're not enforcing your hate speech standard properly. But I don't know why this particularly is, because it feels like, a group of people leaves Facebook and Twitter to join a new platform, and the woke companies complained that they were allowed to leave, in effect. I don't know. But
well, I mean, does that really relate to Parler, or was that not just due to Zuckerberg stating that he wouldn't brand Trump's posts with warnings in the same way that Twitter had done?
Yes, that as well. I have no doubt that's.
So suddenly he became the. Suddenly Zuckerberg became the target, and this is just it. I don't think the companies really are that interested. But I think the companies are themselves afraid that they will be attacked by a witch hunt. So the way you protect yourself from being attacked by a witch hunt is being part of the witch hunt.
Well, my point is that, as this last paragraph says, so Facebook and Twitter appear to be stuck between a rock and a hard place. Their advertisers demanding a level of censorship the users are finding unacceptable. Many of the companies abandoning them are sticking with YouTube, which seems to have solved the puzzle. It claims that YouTube seems to have solved the puzzle of keeping brands and controversy apart, which is complete nonsense. It's just the case that YouTube is the only platform. There is no alternative to YouTube. But
one note as well that I'd like to point out is this happens over and over again. A company makes a big deal. Oh, we're leaving. Quietly, a month later, they're right back again. 2 months later, oh, we're leaving this time. Again, back again. This is nothing more than a PR stunt. And especially now, too, with COVID, the commie cough going for its second round in certain countries, marketing budgets are probably being slashed. And stuff like social media spending is probably some of the first areas that they're going to be cutting in.
So effectively, one is using one's impotence, which is one's inability to afford this anymore, as a form of virtue to advertise. Yeah. As in, look, we are no longer doing this, whereas in reality we no longer, we're not sure we'll be able to afford it because we have to cut back advertising due to belt tightening.
And this is also why they're still doing YouTube, because YouTube advertisement is relatively effective. An advertisement at the best of times is loading a shotgun and shooting at the moon. Your odds of actually hitting anything are pretty remote. But YouTube is fairly directed, whereas social media is even more scattershot. It's comparable to planting on the old days where they would put advertisements on the sides of buses.
Yeah.
Do that now.
Sorry, Poe?
They still put adverts on buses, but usually for movies.
Yeah, but it's like the real market for advertising on YouTube is mobile, because there are no ad blockers on mobile, or at least none which are, relatively easy to install and sort out. But and YouTube can just spam ads on mobiles all the time because people, especially in cities, just use their mobiles for the internet all the time. Everyone on the tube is using Wi-Fi or whatever, and YouTube can put ads everywhere. Although I don't know anyone, and I certainly have never clicked on an ad on YouTube because I've been convinced to buy something because of it. But it must work somehow. Although I don't know who that's aimed at apart from children, really. Do you know what I mean?
Well, that's the thing. Advertisement is the most literal game of big numbers ever. If you put out 1 million adverts, your odds of getting even a percentage of that in actual clicks, you'd be lucky. So that is why they just need to spread the message as wide as humanly possible, which is why social media is so great for it, because they can pay virtually nothing and get tens of thousands of impressions out of it. This is why on YouTube you get something like 0.0 something cents per view. Like, that's how little the advertisement is actually worth.
Yeah.
Advertisement for actually number of clicks it gets. Well, not the view.
Yes. It works in two ways. It is either commission-based, so if someone clicks your ad and buys something, they get a commission, which is usually quite large. Or it's click-through. So it's basically if they click your ad at all. And most ads are not charged if someone clicks the skip ads button, for instance. They don't count as a view for the advertiser or anything like that. I don't know. I compare it to my own experiences with things like merch, which people can see on screen right now. If you're interested in buying a shirt, please feel free to. Shameless shill there. But the actual click-through rate on that is something like I had 20,000 eyes on my shirts, etc., of which about 1.8% of people actually went to the website, of that 1.8%, 1% bought a shirt. So that's basically it. I sold 4 shirts, and that's what that is. But if you're interested in supporting the channel, then we have some various shirts on the website. You can find a link in the description. But yes, so advertising. I feel like we've gone off on a bit of a tangent here. So I'm going to bring us back onto another story, which is L'Oreal, which is has ended racism this week, ladies and gentlemen. They are going to remove words, including the word whitening, from their skin products. Which is a similar move to Unilever, which it's the Dutch again, Arch. That's what it is. But yes, French cosmetics giant L'Oreal said on Saturday it will remove words like whitening from its skincare products. That comes amid global protests against racism sparked by the death of George Floyd.
I want to point out, too, these are not protests against racism. These are protests for racism, specifically anti-white.
Yes, definitely.
Well, the interesting bit is that they're not actually, they're not doing away with the product. They're just changing changing the words.
They're problematic.
Actually refer to the product.
Yes, they
Again,
are.
it's PR. This will give them views. This will give them attention. And in 2 months' time, I bet you it'll be white again.
It's going to remove the words white/whitening, fair/fairness, light/lightening from all its skin evening products. Which is funny, isn't it? Because, obviously they're removing actual fairness from... But
somebody already pointed out, I heard someone talk about this yesterday, in which they said, well, they would love to know how L'Oreal is going to refer to their bronzer.
Yes. I think I put up something on Twitter, which was like, no, I can't even remember what it was I put, but basically it took a paragraph to use to say the same thing as the word lightning, which is ridiculous.
I don't know if you've ever looked at, I don't know if you ever buy, you call them cotton buds or Q-tips. You know, the little plastic stick with a bit of cotton on each end that people usually buy to put in their ears to get the wax out.
Yes.
The instructions on that box, nowhere on the box does it say that it's for putting in your ears to get wax out, and it explicitly says, do not put this in your ears. And people still buy them in the millions for that exact purpose. So I don't think this would actually hurt the product. People know what it is. They know what it does.
Yes, they'll have made it.
Like that.
I don't think there's going to be a mass boycott over this.
Yes, it's a strange world in which we live. It's the same world, which of course also contains McDonald's plastic lids on coffee cups saying "Warning: contains hot coffee."
Oh yes,
and the
this
same
product...
world in which, in China, McDonald's bans black people because they said they're filthy and spread the COVID, according to China, not me.
Yeah.
Whilst in America, going, we stand with Black Lives Matter.
Yep. No contradiction at all. Yes.
Use the eunuch says, don't say anti-white racism, just say anti-white. I think I'd rather just say the word racism and reclaim what they are trying to claim.
So one could also just use the greater umbrella term that is nonsense.
Yes. Burnsy3210 says, Colgate offers advanced whitening in 14 days, and people are having a field day with that. Yeah, definitely. Notice that at the end of this article, underneath another ad, sort of almost tucked away here again, they say, English model Munro Bergdorf notably accused the beauty brand of hypocrisy, having fired her 3 years ago. Ms. Bergdorf was sacked as L'Oreal UK's first openly transgender model in 2017 for decrying the racial violence of white people. Of course, this isn't entirely true. And in fact, if you go to the race row incident on something even as simple as Wikipedia, although you can corroborate it in other places, she made many, many statements, including calling all white people guilty of racial violence, claiming that the white race was the most violent and oppressive force of nature on Earth,
I do enjoy being referred to as a force of nature. Just point out that.
Yes. Noting that Munro Bergdorf is English, so this is all in the context of Britain as opposed to America, claiming that your existence, privilege, and success as a race is built on the backs, blood, and deaths of people of colour. Because we made no sacrifices whatsoever.
Yes, and
throughout
this
all
is
history.
particularly interesting, of course, coming from a model.
If you can call her that now. I mean, she was
I
wasn't
just
she an
mean, on the money was made on the backs, blood, and death, and you just go, okay, and this is a person who is a model.
Yes. And
Just so this is not some labourer in the fields or somebody hauling bricks up a wall at a building site or something. No, this is a model.
Although she did end up being an advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, albeit briefly.
Of course, yes.
Until she was let go from that position after it became clear that she was deeply anti-Semitic and racist. It was just absolute nonsense. And yes, she was banned from Facebook. And then she complained she faced online harassment, much of it of a racist and transphobic nature. I wonder why. But yes, so L'Oreal, the great platformer of Munro Bergdorf, are going to remove the words white, whitening, fair, fairness, and light and lightning from all its skin evening products. As Arch says, probably to return them at a later date as, like L'Oreal Classic. Here's new L'Oreal.
No, not classic. Classique.
Classique. Here's L'Oreal. L'Oreal Nouveau L'Oreal, and
because we are
L'Oreal
wealthy.
Classique. Indeed.
Look,
But yes. Oh yes, and Mez pointed out George Floyd's famous last words: "I can't breathe." Also, free Palestine, because Black Lives Matter UK has, I believe, tweeted out this morning in solidarity with Palestine for relatively unknown reasons. It's almost as if they've got an ulterior motive for anything else. Yes, as Israel moves forward with the annexation of the West Bank and mainstream British politics is gagged of the right to critique Zionism and Israel's settler colonial pursuits, we loudly and clearly stand beside our Palestinian comrades. Free Palestine. I don't think Palestine would do much in favour of BLM. I think, in fact, they would probably just shoot them in the street and be done with them, Tiananmen Square style. Don't you agree?
Well, it's, funnily enough, this isn't the first sort of I've heard. I definitely remember sort of hearing the one about Free Palestine, but I've seen various sort of references of Black Lives Matter and Palestine over the last weeks. Which is, of course, why I then, when the new rainbow flag was unfurled for Pride, that I just couldn't help but point out that, well, there's a certain similarity of motif, which then, of course, led to lots of left-wingers saying, oh, no, there are other flags, too, who have that. This is a conspiracy theory. This is nonsense. And I'm going, well, yes, but they're not expressing their solidarity with Palestine now, are they?
I think, yeah, it's been a strange one. I'm willing to let go the motif of the new Pride flag, which appears to just gain an extra colour every time. But there was a really interesting thread which replied to your post, Britisher, which talked about how what Pride used to be. Now, I'm dubious as to how welcoming and wonderful Pride used to be, especially as someone who used to live near Brighton. But it is certainly the case that this year in particular, the anti-turf sentiment has been somewhat dramatic.
Yeah.
It's like, I've heard that three turfs were assaulted, and if that isn't the Pride spirit, I don't know what is.
Yes, that's really sounds nice. That, yeah, I mean, the whole thing about the turfs has been growing. I would say something like the last 3 years or so.
Yes.
It's becoming ever and ever more militant. And yes, I think it's only a matter of time, or as you say, it has already happened, whereby they then actually start physically assaulting people they don't like. Because, one's strength of feeling is sufficient to justify physical attack. It's only the other side that are not allowed to physically attack anybody.
Left-wing violence is speech. Right-wing speech is violence.
Well, it's passion. It shows how deeply you believe something, how fervently you believe something. That the other side, they are cynical. They don't feel it with the same intensity as you do.
They lack empathy.
You are forced by your feelings that are just bursting inside of you and just must somehow be externalized because you feel it so very strongly that you can't possibly be expected to restrain yourself. And yeah, that is kind of the logic under which these people are operating. And yeah, it's childlike.
It's very difficult, isn't it? And it's hard to know where it's going to go, although I can sense escalation. But if we see a large-scale implosion over the course of Pride, I wonder how they'll spin it. Somebody mentioned... I've just been distracted by someone in chat saying, Britisher in a jar, Britisher in a jar. It's just like, yes, Britisher is in a jar.
Okay. I don't know how to respond to that, to be honest. It comes.
Oh yes,
rather devoid of context.
Indeed. So here's the thing. I presume he's just spotted it in the background of the show. But so Colin P. Smith says, as a matter of interest, has there been any evidence of an actual racist motive behind Floyd's death? And this is one of the things which has been vexing me as well for the past short while. Because it's unclear that there was a racial motive at all, which is of course why BLM is not really about racism in the police. Because if you drill down into how many cases are actually due to racism in the police and the fact that they're attacking black people with the basis of racism, then their numbers shrink to single digits, and the people who are involved in those cases are typically dealt with. That's not to say that the police are blameless or that they don't have issues of themselves, but the idea of an explicit racial motive has been completely taken off the table. It's now just assumed axiomatically.
I was thinking of making a video on the subject until I kind of lost all the motivation and self-censoring all of it. But it does make me wonder if a racial intent is always read into violence when it is by a white person to another protected group, another victim group. If a racial hatred is always seen as the cause, if there is not another apparent cause, it's like, I don't know if we can actually live together. I don't know if we can have races living together if racial hatred is always assumed without any evidence.
Yes, and there's also this thing about races living together, which is this weird kind of infantilization of minority communities. So, one of the things that we get taught about, is one of the premier things which psychologists are interested in influencing today, is in-group preference and trying to minimize it. And they point out that even if you had, they reckon in-group preference at the moment for the majority population is not that high in most places, and in London it's something like 5%. But that if you have that in-group preference of 5%, it doesn't matter. It just takes longer time, but eventually you end up with exactly the same situation as if you had 50 or 100% in-group preference, which is that communities end up segregating. But this is then ignored in the case of the minority communities and completely blown out of proportion. So it's like we have an absolute an imperative to end in-group preference in the British population. Because if we don't, then in-group preference will mean that we will segregate and isolate minority communities completely ignoring the fact that minority communities are self-isolating themselves because they are experiencing exactly the same in-group preference sort of forces, and the idea that if this stuff is effectively inevitably going to happen, even if your in-group preference is 0.01%, the idea of completely abolishing it in a country altogether, in a country in which, in particular, you've incentivized multiculturalism, is an utterly insane prospect without, some sort of insane sort of authoritarian measures which wouldn't deal with the in-group preference in the first place. So it's the idea that these sort of tensions between these communities and the in-group preference leanings of them, which means that the reason I brought up in-group preference is because it means that you're much more willing to accept a narrative which is favourable towards your in-group and externalizes a problem in the community onto an out-group. So it's very easy to take something like police brutality, and they say, well, they've got an issue with what's the word I'm looking for? Accountability. But it's clearly motivated by racism because we're black, and that's how we're defining our in-group. And it's much easier to believe that than that there's a problem with crime in the in-group, and that the out-group problem that you've highlighted is still a problem, but not nearly to the scale which you're saying. Anyway, it's very, very problematic is the word which psychologists would use, and that I hate with a fervour.
Is that where the use of the term problematic originally hailed from?
From psychology?
I mean, was it the psychologists who were first using it, and then it was kind of...
No. It was queer theory feminists.
Mm.
Yes. It just seems to have worked its way into all of the humanities now. It's a real pain. Colin P. Smith highlighting that given we are in a sense-wise primarily visually oriented species, I can understand why the first thing one would notice is IC coding. IC coding, not familiar with that particular term, and then possibly apparent gender. That's where I think identitarianism is so dangerous, because it gets in before any nuance of situation can take place. Well, with regards to that, and with apologies to my guests for rambling on, I would say that individualism is something which can only, whilst our nations are relatively individualistic, it can only be taken so far. When you're walking down a dark street at night, on your way home after a night out or something, and you see a shadowy figure across the street, you're not going to be thinking in individualistic terms of, well, if I know this person, and if I go up to them and I understand their views and I see them as a complete person, then I will obviously be able to assess whether or not they're a threat or not. You're going to move to the other side of the road and avoid having that confrontation whatsoever, and you may do that because they're taller, you act differently. If it's a man or a woman, you'll act differently depending on what they're carrying, how they're dressed, and that sort of thing, what kind of area you're in. So it's very difficult to be individualized all of the time, and I think it would be insane to do so. But yes. Appearance of IC1 is white, IC3 is black, etc. Okay. So there we go. Right.
It's a good time. Maybe I should shoot off because I need to go to bed soon.
Yes, I am going to bring us to... We've been running for nearly 2 hours. I wouldn't like us to go particularly over 2 hours, so I think we'll bring things to a close here, just double-checking that we haven't had any more super chats. No, doesn't appear to be, but thank you very much to everyone for turning up for this week's episode of Fake Accents Unite. It's been an absolute pleasure to have my guests here for this week. As always, the Britisher, thank you for being here.
Honour and privilege.
Thank you very much to Poe for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Follow me on Parler.
Marvellous. Same thing, at Poe the Person, no spaces. And thank you very much to Arch for making a first appearance. What did you make of the show?
It was amusing. Sadly, less racist than I had been promised, but I'll swallow my disappointment.
I'll have to bring V on at the same time, and then you can really have that sort of interaction, eh?
I think also Swedes more than likely didn't get sufficient to mention.
Let me point out one thing as well. My hatred of Swedes has nothing to do with race because Swedes are not human. Okay, it's like disliking a dog.
It's an interspecies thing, you say?
Yes.
I'm definitely not getting callbacks to the rape of was it Don King in China? But there we go. Thank you very much to everyone, and we'll see you next week. Hopefully, have a great time and take care. Good night.
Toodle bit.